Definition: establishing boundaries. When you think about boundaries, what is it that you think of? Social boundaries, school boundaries, relationship boundaries? Well, actually, the boundaries I'm talking about are definition. When you write, there are many definitions that you are writing. When you define, you identify the features that distinguish a term, setting a boundary around it. The boundary enables both you and your reader to use the term defined in the right context. Sometimes a word or phrase will pose a definition question. Terms like information superhighway and virtual reality will need an extended definition as opposed to a brief definition to define it, so the reader will obtain enough information for proper understanding. Abstract terms, as most of you know, are things that we can't detect with our five senses. These require extended definitions too. Words like democracy, hatred, or bravery are too complex of words for us to use a brief definition. You and I would have differing ideas about what they mean, which is why you must explicitly define each, so that the reader is clear of what you are portraying to them. Types of definitions. There are three main types: synonyms, essential definitions, and extended definition. Synonyms and essential definitions are the same, for they often are only just a word to a sentence or too long. Extended definition can go from a paragraph to several pages long. All three are connected. Synonyms and essential definitions are the starting points for extended definitions. Extended definitions pretty much build off synonyms and essential definitions. Synonyms. Most of you know what a synonym is, so I won't need to explain in too much depth what one is. But as a brief definition, synonyms are words with practically the same meanings. Synonyms are important because they put different shades of meanings on a message. If you are setting an object on the table, there's a different shade of setting it by saying slamming the plate on the table as opposed to placing the plate on the table. Essential definitions. It does three things: identifies the item being described, places it in a broad category, and then distinguishes it from other items in that category. For example, you can have a .357 revolver. Well, how would I essentially define this object? A .357 revolver is a gun, specifically a pistol that you can carry and conceal. The only downfall there is to using essential definitions is that you can't fully define abstract terms. On the other hand, though, they are useful, for they are short and they're the starting point for extended definitions. In lots of cases, it's necessary to write more than just an essential definition. Technical, social, economic, scientific, and mathematical terms would need lots of explaining, allowing extended definitions to be very useful. Many terms with differing meanings also must be defined extendedly. Extended definitions are not just used for boring exercises for college English classes that you take your senior year, but they are also used in many careers. A police officer needs to have a clear understanding of what counts as reasonable grounds for search and seizure. A chemical engineer must comprehend the meaning of stress. A nuclear medical technologist had better have a solid grasp of radiation. There's also flaws of extended metaphor. Circular definition. Don't repeat yourself. If you're describing a baseball to someone who has never heard of the sport and they ask what a baseball is, don't say a baseball is a ball used for baseball. Describe it. Come on. Tell them the texture, the color, how it is made, what's it look like, what's it made of. Overly broad definition. Don't give a general description of something. A zoologist is a scientist. Duh. What is a scientist? What kind of scientist? Tell specifically what a zoologist is. We want details, people. Come on. Overly narrow definition. Also, don't overkill the description. A perfect example of this is saying a kitchen blender is a bladed electrical appliance used to chop foods. Chop foods? It does more than that. It also liquefies, whip, and otherwise it just processes foods. Omission of main category. Don't use is where or is when. Where is to describe a certain geographical position on Earth, or it could be in space. When is to describe a point in time. Those you don't need. Don't use those. Defining something in the real world. Ethical issues are big in people's minds. How something is defined can have a huge impact. For example, back in the day, by defining Africans as subhuman, justified the fact that it is okay to slave trade and continue slavery. Calling Jews vermin helped carry out the Holocaust in Germany. Marking Hispanics as no-job, fence-jumping lowlies helps people think of them lower, and it helps justify employers' train of thinking by hiring them for extremely low wages when they are illegal. And finally, we come to the four-step process for writing a definition. Number 1 is your plan. Identify your topic, establish an audience, and identify the purpose. There are 3 parts to this part. Brainstorm, creating a table or chart, and creating a plan. When you brainstorm, you distinguish characteristics and examples. Is your topic too broad or too narrow? When you create a table or chart, make it your own definition. Make it your definition with key characteristics, examples, and exclusions. Find the best strategy. There are 9 different strategies. Trace the history. Narration is trace the history of a new development or change the meaning of a term. Description, point out interesting or important features of a device, an event, or an individual. A process, you're explaining a device and how it is used. Illustration, trace changes in meanings and define abstract terms by providing examples. Classification, putting your term into different categories that it fits in. Comparison, you compare 2 terms together. You either compare them together or you contrast them. Cause and effect, explain the origin of an event and the consequences that result afterwards. And then finally, negation, place limitations on conditions in events and correct popular misconception. Number 2, create a plan. Organize your table. Put it in a fashion that is now ready to be put on paper. Now the second step, develop rough draft. There's an intro, a body, and conclusion. The intro is where the term is first mentioned. It is the reason for definition. The reader is going to want to know more about what you're talking about. It is the dominant characteristic. That's what hooks your reader. There's then the body. This is where your definition comes in place. It presents the defining characteristics with a definition. And then finally, your conclusion. That's a summary. It summarizes the main point. It calls the reader out for action, or it predicts an outcome or stresses the importance of the term. It closes up your paper. Revise. Get other people to read your rough draft. Take in their responses. Discuss with them. Self-reflect on your rough draft. Do the characteristics fit? Insert or delete anything. Do you have to insert anything to make your topic stronger? Do you have to delete anything? Maybe you overstress the term. Test for clarity of definition. Make sure it's clear to your audience. Don't confuse them. Don't overwrite them with words or anything. Just make it simple and make sure it's clear to them. And then test for ethics. Finally, you proofread. Check for grammar, sentence structure. Make sure your paper looks professional, not sloppy. Nothing can bring the paper down more than a read focusing on the punctuation errors or a spelling error, or even grammatical errors. Once you proofread and you find everything to be correct, you're ready to publish.